Thank you.
I would like to take the question below first, and then we go to the top line question. It says, President of Georgia spoke to transparency of government and evidence-based results. Can our government speak to the transparency initiatives and also to stakeholders' communications mentioned by Mrs. Oshibodu? The general public, perhaps the most important stakeholder and the chief customer, is desperate for power and will better appreciate the privatization efforts if we are more knowledgeable about the steps and realistic achievable milestones.
I would say, in all honesty, and I suspect without too much contradiction, that the process of this power sector privatization was probably as transparent as you could possibly want it to be. Very clear rules, openly set out. A lot of the process were actually televised, and we saw the outcomes. Let me also say with some necessarily honesty also is that those of us on this side working in the public sector are sometimes faced by, I would also say, a justifiable skepticism about government and its intentions. I was just saying that to Comrade Aremu. And we suffer from a deficit of trust on the public sector side. And we suffer that. Even though we are constantly communicating, people don't hear the communication because it is government communicating. And so you take what you hear with a pinch of salt. I think we've suffered that quite a bit. But it doesn't change the fact that we'll continue to communicate and probably try to do that better. So from that point of view, I agree with what President Saakashvili did say. Transparency is critical. Political will is very, very important. Also, communication is equally important. But now that you have the new owners coming in, it's very clear that a lot of that communication, stakeholder engagement, is now also rested fully on their shoulders. Well, maybe I would say significantly on their shoulders. And because of you can only do so many things at the same time. You often have a challenge between dealing with the issues on the ground, engineering issues, customer care issues, and then communicating what you're doing. And often, particularly when you have companies run by engineers, which is what you have in distribution companies and generating companies, Ms. Oshibodu is an exception, I can assure you. She's a big exception. She's not the norm. When you have those kind of companies, engineers don't bother about those so-called soft issues like communication, like regulation, like regulatory issues. They worry more about getting things right. Where are the machines? Where are the wires? Where are the powers? Where are the towers? Get them done and deliver the service. And they find out to their great surprise that nobody knows what we are doing, and so everybody thinks we are doing nothing. So we are learning quite a bit about communication and being transparent. But I would say really that this power sector reform has been one that has been quite transparent in its rules, in its processes, and in its outcomes. And hopefully we'll get the benefit of that. But I don't know if anybody else...
I think Comrade Issa wants to chip in. Briefly.
Yeah, I think I actually noted this point down when I was making my presentation, because it's a very good point that the former president of Georgia raised. And it's linked to the point I'm raising, that we are for reforms, but the reformers themselves must win the confidence of all the stakeholders. And I think the issue of transparency and what you call evidence-based results are very, very significant. I mean, there's no doubt if transparency is defined as television coverage of biddings, of giving certificate for the new investors, of course I agree with the chairman that we actually have transparency. But there's also the other side of transparency people have seen. What we are seeing transparently now, and I've said so before, is higher tariff, little services. Tariff should be linked to services. If you do any other thing, it's extortion. In fact, it's theft. And we can see some protests already happening in some places in which you ask them to pay more and they haven't seen it. You can't sustain reforms if we don't have concrete evidences of service delivery. And Nigerians are desperate for power supply. They are willing to get bought into this program, but it must be linked to service they can see. We pay more now, we can't see it. And our generators are still there. We're still spending on diesel. For me, so this transparency should go beyond the fact that you've bidded, you've gotten the certificate, you are now the new owners. I think there should be transparent service delivery. At the end of the day, that's what Nigerians are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I also had, and I think I mentioned, I started the issue about communication. And the public needs to know more, all across. I want to highlight one thing. There's nothing wrong with us on a daily basis or weekly basis publishing what is available as power for the whole country. There's nothing wrong with us publishing outages and the reason for those outages. But the reason why those things haven't come out is because when you talk to the typical environment where you are joining, so to say, they will tell you straight, the moment you publish, they will vandalize. In other words, and true, it does happen. And who is the they? The public. And I always tell them, and I used one example of those when they heard about, look, we're not going to be able to give you power for XYZ period for this reason. And some group went to vandalize, and I said, we'll leave you there in darkness for a while. When you vandalize, who is not benefiting? It is you. So let's start understanding the state of our environment. I think I agree very much with Comrade Aremu that we need to match service with pricing. But today's pricing, let me be frank with you, one of the lack of communication is we're not relating the price at which we generate, make our own private power generation with the price in the market today. We are generating power privately, all of us, at anything between 40 to 70 naira per kilowatt hour. Meanwhile, we are buying public, depending on where we're coming from, at anything between 5 and at best 12 naira. And nobody is asking what service do I get for that. Are you getting me? And how do I reduce me spending 40 naira, 70 naira? Is there something I'll have to give in return? What is the investment required? All that have to be communicated publicly with milestones like was mentioned. So there's a lot of communication we all have to do. There are too many vested interests that do not want things to change. I was listing here, I'm using this as the opportunity. Who are the interested parties? There's the regulators who want to regulate from day one. There's the labor who wants, let's continue the way we were. But the way we were didn't land us where we are. There are the contractors of the existing system who do not want their own system to change. There are various ministries involved in this, various power, etc., who every day, every week, call us to Abuja on various meetings, for various meetings. There's also the presidency also who wants to make that thing happen. So they also call us for various meetings. There are the political opponents who use power as the basis to sabotage their fellow politicians. So depending on which side you are, various parties are trying to misuse the system. All these parties are communicating in different ways. That's why I'm bringing them out as communication parties. They are legislators. The House in fact, the House is an interesting one. The Central House, as the Federal, is different from the state houses. And each one wants to communicate the way they see things happening. And each one wants you to go their own way. We're all not talking to each other and say, what is central? We want power. What are the key levers that are important for? But we keep on saying it's each party that is responsible. So communication among the public also, who have, regularly there's a phone-in program in Edo State that people phone into this, and every day is about electricity. Every day is about electricity. So the public wants results, but they are not even understanding the issues fully on ground. So communication to me is the most important, and bringing out everything transparently, good and bad. So it puts everybody on the toes. Those are my own feedback to you. Thank you.
It appears that the real issue in moving forward is finance, because even the gas issues ultimately require finance to resolve. Should the FGN/CBN not therefore open up a big window to provide concessionary debt guarantees to the new private power asset owners? This question is by the Honorable Commissioner, Economic Planning and Budget, Lagos State, Ben Akabueze.
Finance is not a serious issue for all of us that are investors. It is that the finance will not come if the base structure is not right. For several of us, we already have what I'll call the financial backing, both either from financial institutions or from internal purpose. But the equation must balance. And there are many things that don't yet balance. So the second most important, which is mentioned there, is gas. The gas issue is also a pricing issue, which, if it doesn't balance, does not start the flow. And if the flow that's the process to generate the power, does not start, the end result of providing power for people to pay won't happen. So the financial side is just a facilitator, but that facilitator needs an environment that creates the base for that money to come in. I can see several bankers here. They will tell you that they are ready with the money, but make sure that you balance.
And this last question goes to His Excellency, the President of Georgia. How do you project Georgia to manage the multiple supply relationships vis-a-vis an aspiration for Georgia to self-sustain, if any?
First of all, going back to what was said, one thing should be realized, but also privatization, when we talk about privatization, it's not always, it should be done in the right way, also in systemic way. It's not only transparency that should be assured and that the right people or right way they get the assets, but the issue is, we had Tbilisi Utility Company privatized, but because all of the rest of the system was so corrupt, it didn't make much of a difference. There was one privatized entity dealing with all the others. Actually, not only this privatized entity, which was half of country's electricity, didn't change the rest of the system. The rest of the system corrupted this privatized entity itself. So, in a way, it's like the whole system should, if you just do one link of the system at a time, it discredits the whole process. Either you have a comprehensive systemic problem, or you don't have the process right. With regards to, multiple supply relations, but that's how energy is. Energy is based on multiple supply. There is no thing, let's have only one, because, look, lots of, lines in every direction, good relations with different regions and neighbors, your own supplies, your own, facilities plus their connection to the others, create interdependence, and energy interdependence is a very special thing. Because, for instance, in 2008, Russia attacked Georgia, they bombed us. All the days during these days and weeks of basically extensive standoff with tanks and artillery and bombardments for many days, for at least 5 days of heavy bombardments, interestingly, there was still the only link that existed between Georgia and Russia. What the electricity was still flowing in one direction, and and the Russian utility company was, Tbilisi utility company was still supplied by Russia with energy. So interestingly, even in war times, when there is energy interdependence, because Russian energy system needed Georgian energy system in the south of Russia, and Georgia in a way that moment was linked to that. Even in this situation, you can get situation when bombs are dropping and this last link exists. So energy is a very, when you are talking about existential thing for everybody, and it's existential, you know it from your own country. Even the worst of political tensions might not affect it if it's rightly done. And that's the beauty of interdependence. And but interdependence should not be only with one country, with one region, with one supplier. When there are many different lines, then there is always a way to toss around and choose and not be linked to one particular process. And then finally, I would like to say, the issues you face now, they feel unsolvable, many of you, or many of them. I know people might get desperate and they say, we cannot solve it, it's so many years, it's useless. But once you start really to follow political will to do this, in my country, I couldn't believe it how fast we solved it. It's just a matter of wanting to it. You have basic elements here. You have skilled workforce. You have energy source. You already have experience. You have lots of expertise from international organizations like World Bank. And bringing all this puzzle together, it just takes not as much time as you thought as you might believe it brings. Provided that once, the whole endeavor is undertaken. So I'm sure that like in a few years' time, people in Lagos here, but overall in Nigeria, will just forget and not remember it that it ever existed, the whole thing. And it will be believed it will be remembered as a bad nightmare from the very, murky past, and then that's something that should not. In my country, every time at certain next elections, we had a huge electricity problem. People thought it would never be solved. We solved it. And at very first election, we started to say, well, at least we solved the energy problem. So maybe it should also be considered for you to vote for us again. And people en masse replied, in 21st century, you are now wanted to make us grateful for giving us electricity? Are you kidding us? And so we stopped. We shut up. We understood that that's not. People don't want to look in the past, especially the dark past, and better not remind them of that anyway. They always want something more. So I'm sure that you will get to this stage quite soon. Thank you.
Okay. Commander Aramu has made a special request. He would like to just make a comment for a minute, and I'm timing him from now. So 1 minute.
1 minute, just one suggestion I want to make. That's part of our resolutions at this summit. I think we should call on the Nigeria Energy Regulatory Agency, ably represented here, to organize this stakeholders forum so that we can discuss all these issues. Because the regulatory agency has the capacity to look at the bigger picture. All those points that have been raised, the problem areas, contractors, politicians, investors themselves, of course, labor. And I know that labor is not the only problem. It's all of us. So I think we should have it as part of the stakeholders forum, which should be managed by you. And I think we can learn from Lagos state government that once you bring people together, you can find a way to discuss the issues and then get the result done. I want to say, Eko Nibaje, Nigeria Nibaje. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, to take over this role from you. We really are running ahead of ourselves. We had purposed to extend this session by only 30 minutes, and we're about 5 minutes over that. Just some housekeeping issues before we wrap this up. There are 2 breakout sessions immediately after this session. The first one is harnessing electricity to grow the agriculture, transportation, and housing sectors, and that's going to take place in Lantana Hall, immediately after this. The second one is how do we deliver adequate gas to power Lagos? And that one, I think that one will take place here. I think the venue is indicated in the program as well. It will take place here. That's true. Now, very quickly, because we can't let you go without doing any of our trivia questions, we have the questions. They're not available? Okay. Well, we'll do the energy trivia questions at the next plenary session. But we'd like to remind you, please, for residents of Lagos, that the Lagos State Residence Registration Desk is along the outside lobby, and we'd ask that you kindly seize the opportunity to register. I mean, it's a perfect opportunity. You are here anyway, and it only takes a few minutes. And the benefits of registering and getting a registration card are tremendous. We might not even realize them all now. Yes. Also, we'd like to ask that you please use the apps. The surveys on there, like on the homepage, the surveys are there. If you haven't done the surveys, it will still show up on the homepage. Once you've done it, it will leave. So please do the surveys. It's very important for us to get your feedback. It's the only way we can deliver better summits in future. At this point, I'd like to invite the co-chairs of the Lagos Economic Summit Group. is the grand ballroom. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought this was the grand ballroom. Apparently. Where? What's it called? The grand ballroom. Okay, this isn't the grand ballroom apparently. It's in the grand ballroom. I believe that is the room in which yesterday's registration took place. Yes, that's the grand ballroom, and that's where session 2, how do we deliver adequate gas to power, is going to take place. The other breakout session will be in Lantana Hall. I think that's the last hall along this corridor. I'm not very sure, but it will be clearly marked. We'd like to invite the 2 co-chairs, please, to join the speakers and chair on stage for a group photograph, and also to hand out the gifts that we have for the speakers.